Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diane Farber. Today is September the 17th, 2021, and we have the good fortune today at our Friday meetup to have Benjamin Wright, the artistic director and Pilchuck, and he's also a very excellent artist in his own right and separate from his connection with Pilchuck. So please, Ben, introduce yourself and start the program.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share screen here.
Oh, by the way, if anybody has any questions, please put those in the chat and we will answer those as we go along. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us here. I know we've all been in many Zoom calls throughout the past couple years, and hopefully this is on the slightly more entertaining end of that spectrum. We all sort of live in these little boxes this year, or it feels like these days. So when Diane asked me to talk to your group, I thought it might be best to sort of introduce myself. A few of you are very familiar faces. Many of you are familiar to some degree with Pilchuck, but I hope to introduce those of you that are not to Pilchuck briefly and sort of point everybody towards some places to go if you're interested in learning more. But I thought I'd start with an introduction to who I am and what I do. And what I do here at Pilchuck is a part of a spectrum of creative activity that I'm engaged in, and they both feed each other. So as I go through this presentation, I'm going to sort of start with what I do as a visual artist, talk very briefly about my role as a curator and as an educator, and how all three of those sort of roles come together in my responsibilities here at Pilchuck as we celebrate our 50th year of existence, which is pretty amazing time to be at the helm here. I am a maker, although my original background, educational background, was as an evolutionary biologist. Right out of school, I got a job with some glass blowers and became really fascinated with glass. Some of my earliest artistic influences came from my childhood. This is Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse. Wayne White was the designer for this set and for all the puppetry that happened. And this sort of aesthetic, disappeared from my work as I got really interested in sort of technical craft and pursuing that. But as you can see, when we get back to sort of more current work, it comes back really strong. This is Red Grooms. This is the first art show that I actually remember seeing at the Tennessee State Museum in Nashville. And this is a subway car that was you actually walk through and sections of it move. It had sound. It was a very eye-opening experience as to what kind of format art might take, which up to that point I had a pretty limited understanding. So in a very literal way, it blew my mind and sort of planted some seeds that took a while to germinate. And then, of course, Jim Henson and the Muppet Show was a huge influence growing up, both visually and aesthetically, but also that like genius blend of content that could be understood by both children and in a very different way by adults. But as I said, I did start my sort of artistic practice working with glass blowers and became, for about 2 or 3 years, became really invested in learning the specific craft of glass blowing, and then have been gradually sort of diversifying my skill set as a maker from there. But I attended the Appalachian Center for Craft in outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, in between Knoxville and Nashville, Tennessee, very sort of technically and program focused on traditional craft. But pretty quickly, things started to get a little bit weird. I tried to take that skill set that I was learning and figure out new ways to bring image into this material either through glass processes or through mixed media fabrications and installation and that kind of thing. But throughout, definitely was still making objects and searching for a more immersive and interactive art experience. This was a collaboration with an artist named Suzanne Peck, who baked me this beautiful pie, and it's called Stick Your Finger in the Pie. And it was in a show that I curated that was about skin, both skin in the literal sense, images of skin, but also these barriers that exist between an audience and art, and how could art really push the audience to break some taboos. So there was this warm pie, and after, you know, it was very hard to get the first person to stick their finger in, but then after that it was you know, somewhat irresistible experience. But then also that pie decayed over the duration of the show and presented a whole different face. So also an engagement with time, which you'll see as a recurring factor in my work. How does work change over time, and how can that be used as a expressive potential? I went to graduate school at the Rhode Island School of Design. I was in the glass department, but spent most of my time trying to create opportunities for interspecies communication. I worked a lot with mice. This is a video called the Mouse Empathy Project, where I tried to memorize a mouse routine and sort of make myself into the best mouse I could possibly. This is a species that we share some 99% of DNA with, but clearly there's a fair amount of difference in that remaining 1%. I also worked with zebrafinch. I won't go too into it, but it's a species with plastic language, so it has the ability to learn other species language, which I was really fascinated by. But sort of came out of that experience a little bit uncomfortable working with animals, having animals in cages in my studio. I'm still fascinated by that sort of interspecies collaboration, but sort of search for opportunities in the wild, if you will, for those sort of interactions to occur now. I moved on to plants, thinking sort of simply that maybe there were less sort of issues or sort of you know, issues working with plants, but they're just as complicated and fascinating and have personalities in the same way that animals do. But this is a piece called Basking. This is a portrait of my grandmother, who was a crafter, who was sort of the one maker that I knew growing up, was quite a quilter, actually, was her primary expression. So this is a very literal piece. There's a self-portrait of myself planted in grass below, and the sun passes through my grandmother and then affects the way that my self-portrait grows. This is a piece called Basking. Really interested in setting up systems. If that, you know, that's a very simple system, light and moisture and plants, but was really interested in these sort of far-fetched attempts at creating very complicated systems, like the biosphere that was in Arizona. So many of you are probably familiar with this project, but essentially attempts to create whole closed systems of ecosystems that inevitably fail because of the complexity of the task. At residency in Japan, I started work on this piece, which was my attempt at sort of a closed system. So it contains these various containers contain everything from bonsai to sort of Japanese junk food to growing rice plants and decaying logs, and just trying to create sort of like stylized ecosystem, if you will. And then, you know, my thought was that during the opening, I would insert myself into this system. And it was, you know, partially that was my artistic interest, partially it was my escape mechanism for like uncomfortable opening experience in Japan. I figured if I'm in this bubble, I won't have to answer any uncomfortable questions or anything, but it kind of backfired. I got in there, and then I was thinking that it was something that people would sort of walk by and say, oh, that's interesting, somebody's in that bubble, and then go on their way. But there was a very, very faithful audience. They stood there for 45, 50 minutes waiting for something to happen, which of course the point was that nothing was going to happen. And then really unexpected thing happened. Everybody wanted to try for themselves. And this took a little while to sink in, but this was a very important moment for me, watching people enjoy being inside of the artwork, and really changed the way I thought about my artwork towards looking for opportunities to quite literally place the audience within the artwork. And in doing so, sort of within my brain and my sort of thought and creative process, which is messy and is portrayed as such. This is a piece called Vivisection. Vivisection is literally a slice through somebody's brain of a living organism. So there were all kinds of different elements in this that, again, changed throughout time on a lot of different schedules. So if you look in the center of this image, there's a box which all the wires are protruding from. It's just a relay box, so it turns all these elements on and off in unexpected patterns. But there's other elements such as the rocking chair that are triggered by the audience. There are plants that are growing on their own time scale. There's aquariums full of seawater that are sort of changing over time, and lots of video elements. I began to think about what were the advantages of creating hypersensory environments. If you're giving your audience more input than they can actually take in at one point, what kind of filters does that override? What filters do people bring into a gallery situation where they are assuming they're going to have a certain spectrum of experience and view art in a certain way? And how can you use humor and this sort of overwhelming sensory experience to override those filters and maybe plant some seeds of sort of creative thought?
So Ben,
this is actually the same piece. Sorry, Diane, did you have something?
Yeah, there's a question.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
The question has to do with the chair. Is a person able to go and sit in that rocking chair and just be with the rest of the pieces and the artwork and the plants and so on, or is it just part of the design and not interactive?
It's very much interactive. It's sort of tongue-in-cheek, a meditative chair. If you sit down in that chair, it has a switch on it. It's a rocking chair. So when you rock back and forth, it triggers this sound system of sort of a meditative chant, a sort of self-help meditative chant. But the volume of that chant, if you look carefully at this picture, there are speakers located on either side of the rocking chair, those little black boxes. And it's really quite loud to sit in that chair. So it's not exactly the relaxing experience you might expect, but it is very much an interactive experience. And again, an effort to sort of break down those barriers between the audience and the art.
Thank you.
And then this is the same piece, but reconfigured for a group show at the Center for Book Arts. I was really delighted that the curator there interpreted this as a book. It was not something that I had thought of, but it was a really interesting way for me to start thinking about the work that I was doing. But I was, that being said, I was quite unsatisfied with the experience of not having, of sharing space, if you will. I know that sounds sort of pushy, but the work is a little bit pushy. And so I sort of rethought my ability to participate with this kind of work in group shows. But this is the most recent installation that I had at a gallery in Poland named BWA Gallery. And if any of you are traveling in Eastern Europe, Breslaw, spelled WROCLAW, and this gallery, BWA are producing some of the most interesting exhibitions, craft-based exhibitions in Europe, I think. And I was really, I went there to do a residency at the Eugenius Geppert Academy, which is one of two or three national Polish art academies, and the one that houses the glass program, and met Mika Drozdowski, who is the curator at BWA-SEEK, and we really hit it off. And she turned over her whole space to me. This is Gatunki inwazine is Polish for invasive species. So this exhibition really looked at that concept from several different levels, and in that way it is illustrative of all of my artistic process, that there is a very sort of idea-based examination on a conceptual level, all the way down to very personal content about myself as a human and as an artist. The audience sort of gets to choose what level they really want to interact with that work on. But as you can see, this was a very friendly invasion in general. It involved houseplants. All of these houseplants that you see basically originate in Brazil, Ecuador. They're South American, but they're ubiquitous in all of the homes in Poland. So they basically couldn't exist in this atmosphere, but it's not something we would generally consider an invasive species. This is sort of, as I said, one end of the spectrum of my target audience is I really watch how kids interact with my work and with my installations. I think that if you can grab a 6-year-old's attention and really keep them locked in on a piece of artwork, then you will probably succeed with adults. We don't change that much. And this is one of the many elements of this show. There were about 5 or 6 rooms, and then a very interesting basement space, all of which were one in overlapping installation. But this is a rainbow generating machine. And I would like to point out this lady in the back dressed very appropriately for my artwork. I think that was coincidental, but I really appreciate that serendipity. She has become part of the artwork in this particular case, and started to experiment with a combination of neon and collage, which I've continued to play around with. I'll show you a few more recent pictures. These are quite large scale. I'm about 6'2", and I can walk into that nook just for sort of some scale reference. In the foreground here, you have a history of food. I think food is a really interesting place where culture sort of intermingles food and music. But you can, at the far end, you have some mushrooms sort of from hunter-gatherer days, all the way up to KFC, and then perhaps ending in tofu and a sort of meatless future. But this is essentially a history of the Polish cuisine. And lots of different ways to interact with the show. People were provided with selfie sticks and binoculars. And this is the potato room. So interestingly, I was struck as a potato really being in some ways a symbol of Polish cuisine, and yet it was introduced to Poland by an Italian queen who originated in South America. So this idea around a cuisine being essentially built around a quote unquote invasive species was quite fascinating to me. So I created this wallpaper, and then I also worked with a food think tank to create a cooking show that was sort of lost in translation. So all of the instructions are in Polish, of which I speak hardly a word. And we're making a potato-based dish, which somehow ended up delicious, but it was a pretty hilarious process of translation and mistranslation along the way. And we had some big potato lounge chairs you can see there right in the foreground to watch the video. And this is Queen Bona, who I referred to earlier, who was the queen consort of Poland around the turn of the 16th century, was an Italian woman by birth. And if you look closely, you can see her face has been reconstituted as potatoes. She has been transmutated into a potato. And as I said, on one level, this whole show was really about me and being in a foreign culture, making work in some ways about humans in general, but also about a specific culture and feeling myself as an invasive species and what that meant. So this last piece is a self-portrait of myself as a sort of invasive artist in Poland. It's these sort of cheap Chinese dogs that you could buy on the street everywhere in Poland. That in and of itself was a very interesting exchange to me. But they serve no purpose and they sort of wander around in a mirrored box. It's sort of maybe a bit cynical, but sort of a view on really how seriously maybe we should take a sort of outsider's perspective on a culture. As I mentioned a little earlier, I'm sort of uncomfortable with how this installation work operates in a group perspective, but as a curator, I really enjoy group exhibitions, and as an artist, I search for ways to participate in that. I think it's really a different type of experience to look at how all these artists work, sort of speak together and speak in different sentences than an artist would by themselves. So for the last year or so during pandemic, I've been working on trying to create that installation experience as standalone objects that could coexist a little more peacefully with other people's artwork. So these are two recent pieces, still playing with the collage and the neon. And then this is the most recent piece that's on exhibit at BAM as part of the Bellwether Festival. So any of you that are local, it's a really amazing show that Sarah Blood and Megan Stilges curated, looking all different artists working with light and neon. Really, really pretty amazing show that's up for the month, I believe, till the end of the month. And this is, for me, it's a little bit hard to photograph both the neon and the surface detail, so I apologize for that. But I think things are starting to get to where I feel they speak it as successfully as the installation work. So I'm really excited about this direction. So that's sort of me as an artist. And then I thought I'd just say a few words as an educator, because it is really important part of what I do, both in the classroom and as an administrator. About 9 years ago, I had the opportunity to work at Urban Glass as an education director. And then about 4 years ago, I left that job to, 3 years ago, I left that job to come here to Pilchuck as the artistic director. And as these pictures show, there's some like profound differences in environment and sort of and the nature of these two organizations. But interestingly, I arrived at points in the two organizations' history that have some interesting overlap. At Urban Glass had just been closed for 2 years for this amazing sort of life-changing renovation. So I was hired and walked into this gorgeous new studio. But that being said, was really had a very rare opportunity to build an education program from scratch and an education team from scratch. And it's really exciting to see that momentum carrying forward what they're doing. It was just a really exciting time to be there with a really great director, really great team, and very proud of what we were able to accomplish there and what they've continued to do. It's also a very Urban Glass is, as the name implies, urban. It is in the middle of a very distinct community and serving that community in different ways. Pilchuck, as its history, was built as a remote sort of oasis from society, so it's a very different sort of initial instinct. Of course, we have a community that we serve in a very different way, but it is interesting to look at the differences as well. Another important difference is that Pilchuck, Urban Glass, I think must be approaching 45 now. Urban Glass Pilchuck is celebrating our 50th, so they're about the same age. But Pilchuck has been running a very established education program for most of those, or really all of those 50 years. You'll see in a little bit that a little bit of the history. So it was a little bit different challenge, but when you're at a sort of momentous occasion like the 50th, it really is an important time to examine what you're doing and see where the mission may have gone astray or where it's really sort of right on target after all of these years. And then, of course, the pandemic was a really unexpected pause button for everybody. And I kind of flinch when people talk about silver linings to a event that has affected so many people terribly. But as an organization, the ability to pause for a year and think about where we wanted to go forward at 50 years has turned into some sort of a silver lining, as well as bringing many challenges to the job for myself and the staff, I have to say. I also teach workshops all over the world. I focus on approaching glass from unexpected directions. That might not be that surprising, having just seen the work that I produce. This is a sort of typical class for a workshop. This is a sensory deprivation project that we did with the students. So glass is a very visually intriguing material, and we often focus on that as artists, as collectors, but it also has a lot of other material qualities that can really be used for art making. And in its visual fascination, we often rush directly past those other cues. So I've worked quite a bit with sound artists, and they are immediately fascinated by the soundscape of the glass studio. So that's sort of what keyed this thinking. But essentially, all of these students were deprived the use of all of their senses while we were performing a glass demonstration. And then they were gradually fed their smell and their hearing, and then eventually at the end, their sight. But it refocused all of those senses in the studio, or at least that was the intention. I'm also quite active as an independent curator. I'm not going to go into too many of the shows that I've done in the past, but I will give you guys a link to my website, and you're welcome to check them out. I've worked, was a really nice part of both my job at Urban Glass and here at Pilchuck is having a space to curate, but I have also worked with the Museum of American Glass and Islip Museum, and some other small museums. One of the parts of the 50th that I've been really excited about is working with some organizations, some museums in our general vicinity. And so I'm just going to show you one of those shows because it's opening in a couple weeks at the end of September at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma. I curated this show with Ben Cobb, who is a glass artist himself, but also from the very beginning of the museum has been on the Hot Shop team and now heads the Hot Shop team. They have a very, probably one of the best teams in the world, frankly, in their glass blowing studio. And they have a revolving door of artists in residence who come in and work with the team there. So it was really nice. Pilchuck has had a joint residency with Museum of Glass for 18 years now. So we started with the roster of this joint residency, which as a curator is just a dream to pull from a roster like that. The hardest part is deciding who you're not going to invite, not who you're going to invite, believe me. And having Ben's perspective of having worked with all of these artists in the studio was just incredibly informative to that process. So I'll just show you a few of the works. There's about 15 artists in the show. I'll show you 3 or 4 of them. These are the Della Torre brothers, who were mentors of mine early in the career and in my own career, and I have worked pretty closely with them as a curator now several times. And the point of this show is everybody who has the residency at the museum leaves a piece that is made during the residency for the museum collection. So they're building a pretty interesting collection of objects. And we were hoping through this show to provide the context, the greater context of an artist practice in which these objects exist. So for the Delatorres, this is a piece called Frax Liquor, this bottle here. And they're creating, as they have been doing quite a bit recently, a custom wallpaper. It's not this image that you see in the back. This is another different wallpaper that they created for me for the museum show. And we'll have an installation of both sort of objects, wallpaper, three-dimensional objects coming out of the wallpaper. Really dynamic way of looking at their artwork, and you can see how it sort of informed my own thoughts. This is Andrea Dezzo, an artist of Romanian descent who lives here in the US. She is primarily a paper artist and does these exquisite paper cut. These are called, I think she calls them tunnel books. So there are, I think you can see from the picture, various levels of detail as you sort of move through this book, not literally, but as your eye moves through this book. And she's taken this very whimsical, illustrative aesthetic into glass and created some wonderful objects with the team at the Museum of Glass. This is an Italian artist named Angelo Filomeno. He's primarily an embroidery artist. These are this is very fresh work of his. These are icebergs that are sort of slowly sinking into the ocean here. And one of the most beloved, I believe, beloved pieces at the Museum of Glass, which is his, excuse my English, but it is the title Shitting Skull. So again, putting this into the context of his work as a mixed media artist. Joyce Scott, who works in so many different sort of formats, but we will have on the left, you see her piece from the collection, sort of blown glass with mixed media. We will also have some examples of her jewelry, which carries that sort of beaded surface, and then also some life scale figurative work of Joyce's in the show. And then Laura Donifer, many of you hopefully know Laura's work, but also her work organizing the fashion show. And we really wanted, Laura is very, as sort of a pillar of our glass community and has worked as hard as anybody to create those ties within our glass community. And one of the tools that she does that is through this fashion show. So we really wanted to make sure we expressed that aspect of her creativity. So we'll have videos from the Corning Fashion Show and the fashion show in Murano. And then she reached out to two young artists who she's influenced considerably to present their work as well. This is Jennifer Hand, just coincidentally happens to be my partner. Very proud of her, but so there will be two dresses in the show as well. So this show is opening next week because, as I mentioned, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. And I know that probably all of you, I hope that all of you have heard of Pilchuck and to varying degrees may know quite a bit about it. Some of you may know more about it than I do. But I wanted to, for those of you that are less familiar, give a little bit of a glimpse. And we have, over the last couple of years, been getting our archives digitized by Corning Museum. So we have some wonderful images that are less seen than the sort of stock photos that people have seen 100 times. So I've tried to mine the archives for you a little bit and hopefully present some images that people, even who are quite familiar with Pilchuck, may not have seen before. So we were founded in 1971. This is Dale Chihuly and Ruth Tamura, who together organized the first session of Pilchuck. It was a summer session jointly produced by Rhode Island School of Design and CCA, where Ruth was faculty. And they had the very good, Dale had the very good fortune to meet the Halbergs. This is John and Ann Halberg, who own the tree farm that our school is located on. Dale was able to talk them into running an experiment the first year they became enamored of the project and of Dale, and invested heavily and basically supported the growth of the school for the first 10 years or so, and also granted the property that the school now sits on to the school. So really integral. This that you're looking at, believe it or not, is the glass blowing studio from the first from that first year, located more or less in exactly the same space. A big part of the project the first year was survival and construction. So everybody arrived, they had to both construct their own home and they had to build a hot shop, which they did in about 2 weeks. They built the glass blowing facility. They had to do everything. This is the first bench, glass blowing bench, which was referred to as a swan, but was hand carved upon arrival. But pretty quickly, word started getting out. The second or third year, this more permanent structure was built, which is the basis of our current hot shop. So this is about 1973, 74. And you can see this is the hot shop as of a year or so ago. It's actually undergone another minor transformation, but you can see basically the skeleton of that original structure there. As the school has grown over the years, we've really expanded to offer pretty much every type of glass working that you can imagine throughout the year. So we have studios for neon, flame working, stained glass, mosaics. We have a beautiful printmaking studio. We have what we refer to as a bot lab, which is our embrace of new media. So 3D printers, we have laser cutters, sort of CNC cutting machines. So a number of ways to investigate how the hand and machine work together, as well as a cold shop. And we've built an additional hot facility as well that's quite a bit more flexible for us to reflect the various ways that people make and teach in the media today. The student experience has also changed a little bit over the years. Dale admitted to me recently that he slept in his car the first year. He was just too busy to actually even build a structure. But many of the structures looked like this. They were built out of plastic parachutes. There was a couple that lived in a stump the first year. And then there was several generations of ingenious artist built cabins on campus, some of which are still treasured and standing today. This is Buster Simpson's cabin, which was built in the second year of the school, and has persevered to this day. And believe it or not, I can barely stand up in there, but it is a much fought after housing assignment. It is sort of the iconic Pilchuck experience. This is what we more typically house students in now. This is our cottages. So still a beautiful woodland experience with a little bit more comfort. Instead of cooking your food on a fire, our students are served gourmet meals in our lodge. And this is a view of the lodge at night. So the experience has transformed significantly over the 50 years, but some things are really, really ingrained in the Pilchuck experience. And one of them is this setting in this magical space that can't be replicated anywhere in the world. And I really encourage students here to explore the setting. The hot shop and the studios can become so magnetic and draw you in. And I always caution people to remember, snap out of it and take a walk in the woods every once in a while as well. The student body, this is the student body, I believe I think this is first year. It seems like a couple too many people. This must be the second year. There were 18 up here the first year. And this is 2019, the last time we had full sessions up here. So we have about 100 people on campus at a time now these days, under normal conditions. And it's a really vibrant temporary community that forms in 2 weeks. It's kind of magical alchemy of artists that come together and create things for 2 weeks. Technology has also changed a lot. This is one of the earliest pictures I can find of Dale. Those are slide carousels in his hand. So, we've moved from slide carousel to PowerPoint, but throughout it all, Pilchuck has really endeavored and will continue to endeavor to stay at the forefront of the techniques that artists use to make their work. In that it is the 50th, I thought I would go through our program for next summer. I could give a whole presentation on this, and I think Tom's probably already seen that presentation a couple of times. But I thought instead of speaking at depth in this, I'm going to just pull a class or an artist from each session, talk about it a little bit, and then point to, these are all actually up on our website now. So if you're intrigued, I encourage you to go to the Pilchuck website. I'll show it to you at the end. And you can scroll through the whole program because it really is curated in its entirety. And these sort of snapshots give you an idea, but I think to be truly appreciated or sort of understood, it's nice to sort of even just quickly scroll through it in its entirety. But we have various sessions throughout the summer. These sessions vary in length from about 8 days to 18 days. And then in the fall, we have a couple shorter sessions. Each session has a theme. For me, themes are very broad ideas, and I try and look for as much diversity within that theme as possible. So people talking about an idea in as many different ways as possible. And our session's a little bit out of order, but we'll start with the gathering, which looks at Indigenous artists. We have a session called Family Ties, which will endeavor to support artists with families, and we'll run a youth camp alongside our normal adult classes. And we have a special session dedicated to the influence, the now 48-year influence of European artists coming to Pilchuck. And then we have 3 special sessions called Corporus, Encephalon, and Animus. These are Greek words for body, brain, and spirit or soul. So, you know, very broad ideas that to sort of group artists and try and get groups on campus that will be really sort of symbiotic with each other. So from session 1, I wanted to introduce you all to Thomas Colbankston and Cara Romero. They'll be teaching a class on image making and identity in glass. Thomas is of the Sami tribe, which is indigenous people of northern Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And he teaches at Comstock in Stockholm, Sweden. Teaches in the printmaking department, but has a really interesting, works a lot with glass, but also with other transparent materials. He's invested prints in big blocks of ice. So he'll slide them under the ice in the spring and then in the fall, and then let the ice grow throughout the winter, and then use a chainsaw to carve these big blocks of ice out and have these beautiful prints. So really imaginative way of approaching transparency in image. And then Cara Romero is from the Chemehuevi tribe in the Southwest US. And she'll be teaching more digital processes. So she has primarily a portrait process, take some fascinating portraits, and we'll be talking about that process and also digital manipulation and processing of images. In session 2, the body, corpus, Judith Schechner and Glenn Carter will be teaching a class together. Again, 2 really different approaches to a very old process. Yes.
Ben, excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah, we needed the slide to change. Thank you.
Sorry?
What happened was we were still on the other slide when you started talking about this one, so.
Okay, there might be a little bit of a delay.
Right.
So this is Judith Schechner's work. Hopefully, if you aren't aware of her work, please look her up. I had the good fortune of teaching with Judith at University of the Arts in Philadelphia for several years. And then Glenn actually taught quite recently at Pilchuck. Glenn, for those that you might be less familiar, has a much looser, more expressive, painterly approach to the material, whereas Judith's imagery is much more constructed with layers and layers of glass. So I think there'll be a really fascinating combo to teach together. In session 3, Family Ties, as I said, we'll be running a youth camp and inviting families as both students and faculty and artists in residence. Each session throughout the summer we have either one or two artists in residence on campus. They really have no responsibilities other than investigating how to translate their work into glass. So we present that opportunity to artists. In exchange, they have many informal roles on campus. They often attend critiques and drop in on classes and collaborate with students and teachers on campus. So Saya Wolfach is an artist who works heavily in the sort of interface between myth and reality and science fiction. And she does so in site-specific video installation. Again, for those of you that are local, she has a really fascinating display at the Seattle Art Museum right now, where she has her own work, but has also curated objects from throughout the museum that she feels like express various aspects of empathy. So it's an exhibit all centered on the idea of empathy and how art can express empathy, which I think is quite wonderful. For a little context, these artists were invited 3 years ago to come to Pilchuck, so that is purely serendipitous that she now has a show at the Seattle Art Museum. But if you are coming to Seattle, I encourage you to check it out. Also, a new feature that I'm trying to introduce to the program is more of a presence of curators within the program. I think these are the gatekeepers of our time in terms of introducing artists to opportunities. So I think it's really important to bring interesting curators to Pilchuck to expose them to our community and vice versa, to expose our community to curators who are doing interesting things out in the world and how they're thinking and writing about work. Blanca de la Torre had a bit of a viral moment that many of you may have seen. This is as Spain was just starting to reopen from, I think, the first wave of COVID. And this is the Barcelona Opera, and Blanca de la Torre curated an audience of plants for the Philharmonic for this quartet to perform for, and it became a really viral image and drew a lot of attention to a curator who I think is doing very important work. She's very interested in environmental issues, not only as they are expressed in art, but also as they apply to artistic process and the process of producing and moving art all over the world and the environmental impact of that. So obviously, as glass artists, these are very important questions for us to begin to tackle as we delve into the future and as we work in a really energy intensive material. Really excited to have Blanca here sharing her thoughts, really sort of looking at our systems and giving us some feedback on where she feels think the future might be. And then on Encephalon, I can't think of two brainier artists to invite than Matt Zaz and Anna Mozowski. I think between the two of them, they are some of the few glass artists who I can point to and say, in this current generation, and say, these two have invented multiple ways of working with glass that did not exist before. And that's kind of a profound statement when you think of the history of artists and craftspeople working with glass. Matt Zaz, this structure in the back is made of woven fiberglass twine, which is then fired and becomes this glassy type structure. So that netting is entirely a glass-like structure. And the bottom right images from Anna is actually a form that was fired in a kiln, a three-dimensional form, but involved no mold material whatsoever. So again, both of these are innovative approaches to the material. And that's what their workshop will be focused on, really. Not so much how to do these techniques that they've invented, but how can artists create an inventive process in their own artistic process. And then another great example of inventive process, this is Animus, or the Soul session. And Anthony Amoka Atta is a Sudanese artist who is doing his PhD at Sunderland in England, and has developed this process for making these hyper-realistic kente cloth out of fused glass. So this too is a piece of glass. And I think he's just beginning to scratch the surface for the potentials of these. And then we move, so that's sort of the summer program for our 50th. And then we move into the fall. We have two sessions in the fall that are much shorter. So there are 6-day sessions. They're really, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, this format was introduced. There was a recognition that not everybody had 2 to 3 weeks to sort of check out a life and come to Pilchuck, but maybe interested in having a different kind of Pilchuck experience. So we've really grown those over the years. And in these 2 fall programs, given that it is our 50th year, I was really interested in very consciously mixing fascinating up and coming artists with artists who have been involved in Pilchuck from almost day one. And trying to get a really interesting mix of that. And so certainly some of these names I think are familiar. Thurman Tutsinski and Dick Marcus will all be teaching a class together. And I think that you couldn't really look for 3 more different ways of making with glass, or different processes of approaching the hot shop, specifically the glass blowing process. So really excited. These Toots and Thurman were here from maybe year 2 or 3. Dick not too much later than that. And all of them have had profound influence and continue to have influence on the school as we move forward. Sylvia Levinson is an Argentinian artist living in Murano in Venice, a phenomenal kiln cast artist who also punches a lot of conceptual weight. Her work has this amazing quality of being epically beautiful, and then as you approach, sort of kicks you in the gut a little bit. And that's something I really appreciate about work. I think it has a really strong impact in that way. And then speaking of this intergenerational phenomenal energy, Megan Stilges, a local neon and glass artist, will be teaching a class with Laura Donifer. And I think they'll probably be dancing probably almost as much as blowing glass. They're both very much into the performative aspect or possibilities of the material. And we'll wind up that last fall session with a homecoming event here on campus that we've been thinking about for a couple of years, and we're so excited to have a homecoming here on campus. It will combine aspects of campus life. Fritz will roast a pig for sure. We will have things going on in the studio, live music, very casual in the sense that our campus is a very casual and friendly and family place. And will also just be a really, really great way for our staff and for those folks on campus and those that travel here to celebrate this 50th season, which I should be more explicit. We are now celebrating our 50th, even though 2021, if you count by the calendar, would have been our 50th year. We had a quite different year this year, thanks to the pandemic. We largely ran residencies throughout the summer, tried to have a more local impact and a smaller number of artists on campus.
I turn this off?
You don't have to worry about it. But we will now be celebrating our 50th from auction to auction. And for those of you that are new to Pilchuck has an annual auction in October. It's in October 16th. This year it will be both a live and a digital online production. There will be a silent auction with work for view and bidding a week before the 16th. And then you will be able to attend both in person, or you can bid online at the actual event on the 16th. The theme this year is reflections. You can see some of the on the right there, you can see some of the outfit suggestions that Sarah Parkinson has put together for us. I am preparing my sequins as we speak. This is a look at 2019. The theme was Masquerade. For those of you that have attended, it's a really lovely event. I will say tickets are almost sold out. So if you are interested in attending, I encourage you to go on our website. I'll show you how in a second. And go ahead and book tickets if you are interested in attending. We'll have about 300 people in person this year, which is a bit smaller than usual, but it's a great event with friends and costume, and of course, wonderful artwork. This is artwork ranging from very well-known artists, Cappy Thompson and Deborah Moore here, to more emergent artists. This is Colleen Ibanka, a Polish artist, again, from that really interesting scene in Breslov. A graduate and now teacher at Eugeni's Gephardt Academy. This is David Rios, who was one of our fellows this year, which is a new program for us, giving work study opportunities to young emergent artists. This is a little bit better known and further along his path, but this is Corey Pemberton, amazing artist and co-founder of Crafting the Future, which is a organization that is doing tremendous work to help diversify our field. We've got both the Sterns. This is Amanda Stern and E. Stern. Actually, two very different aesthetics, but both making lovely objects out of glass. Sean O'Neill and Jen Ellick. There's a number of really nice neon pieces. So this is just to give you guys the quickest of glimpses. I encourage you to go to our website if you're interested in anything more. And if you see up on the left here there's a header that says programs. If you go to that, you'll have a drop-down menu where you can find the programs for next summer that I was talking about in more detail. And then in this larger font directly under the torch, you'll find Pilchuck Auction and Gala. If you click on that, it will give you the most up-to-date information. Obviously, we are monitoring Delta variants and everything going on in the world. And if there is any updated information, it will end up here. But if I can just go back here, I will also point out the tab in our upper right corner, which is join our mailing list. I very much encourage you to do that if you want to stay up to date on what's going on throughout the year. With our 50th, there will be many other events, exhibitions, and opportunities. We have some exciting things in the work with SeaTac Airport, lots of stuff that will be rolling out throughout the year. So I encourage you to join our mailing list. We do our best to not abuse that and send you too much information, but we'd love to keep you up to date in what's going on. This is the auction page, and there you can see there's a fax webpage and also a nice pink button to buy tickets if you haven't done so already. And then this is my website as well. If any of you are more interested in what I've done and continue to do creatively, as these things are, I'm always making a little bit faster than posting, but you can get up to date more or less on what I'm up to. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you guys. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that was kind of a whirlwind spin through Ben's brain, but I'm happy to answer any
Ben,
questions.
I do have a question, and my question is, when will the catalog be available for the auction items, and will they be online, and where?
The catalog is going to the printer today. It will go out in the party boxes. I didn't mention that, but if you go on that auction, I'm not sure if they're up yet, but there will be, for those of you who are choosing to attend via online digital auction, you can order a party box, which attempts to sort of pack all the fun of the auction and send it out to you in the mail, and the catalogs are in there. They will be at the event, and I'm not sure if they will be available online, but I assume that information is available on the webpage where I encourage you to go. And I would say if there is any discrepancy between details that I say and the things on the webpage, go with the webpage, because that's where the most updated information will be placed. So I think I got everything right, but.
Okay. Are there any other questions that anybody has about attending the gala or watching it virtually, or anything else that you'd like to ask Ben right now?
Ben, can I share a quick question?
Sure.
it may take a little while for the answer, but Pilchuck over the years has built social media that has tens of thousands of followers, I think, if I remember correctly. Can you talk about, are there any like new strategies or strategies you might want to share with us that's helped make you all so successful?
In terms of building that, social media presence?
Yeah,
Specifically? Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it is cumulative. I mean, that's part of it, right? I can say from my own social media, which does not have tens of thousands of followers, but is growing, it is cumulative to some degree. So that's part of the success. I think we have a new marketing director, Sarah Parkinson, who came on in the spring, and I don't know how apparent it was, but I immediately noticed sort of a change in tone. What we're trying to create is a more constant conversation with our audience instead of navigating from sort of headline to headline, filling in. And Sarah is really concentrated on telling the stories that make up Pilchuck, because that really is, I always tell people, Pilchuck's amazing. It's in this epic place, the studios are amazing, but it's really the people that show up that create the Pilchuck experience and make it unique every single time you come here. And I think that so those stories are really what people latch into in social media and the sort of personal level. And I think there's been a real tone in our previous marketing director was phenomenal as well, and there was a lot of growth under her. But these things do change, and there's new, I think, hire a young social media director is younger than I, for sure, because I mean, it is true. These technologies really change. The tools for artists really change. Working with our fellows, the sort of promotional path that I would have prescribed 5 years ago wouldn't have even included Instagram, which is their primary method of getting their work out into the world now. So it's important to keep up to date on what changes. I don't know how specific that was, but I really think focusing on the personal and building up a following that is supportive over years. It is a cumulative process, I think, but not one I can take credit for, by the way. That is not my my good work here. We have phenomenal people in the marketing department.
Thank you.
Okay, Ben, we at AACG really want to thank you so much for this complete exploration of your work, your cutting edge work for many of us, and for the presentation of Pilchuck from 50 years ago to the present, and your plans for the 50th full year celebration. It's really wonderful. Thank you so much. And everyone, next week, we'll be back on Friday, and Brent Lewis, Director of Design for Heritage Auction, will be telling us a little bit about how aftermarket glass art differs from aftermarket other kinds of art. So we'll be looking at that, plus looking at some of the glass pieces for the upcoming auction that Heritage will have. Thank you all, and have a really wonderful week.
Thanks, guys.
And those people who want to stay on can just chat. We'll do that.